Senator, I am not going to discuss any conversations I have or have not had with the President of the United
did you
States.
See that
you're an attorney. You have a law degree, and you know that I'm not going to do that. I also find it fascinating, because I'll keep fighting to ensure that law enforcement and the judicial process move forward without political interference. No one is above the law, not even the President. That's a quote from you, Senator Blumenthal, in 2017.
Well, let me ask you then, when you saw that
No
post,
one is above the law. That was your quote.
When you saw that post, did you talk to anybody in the White House?
I am not going to discuss any conversations I have, nor any investigations,
So
nor
you are unwilling
any
to tell this
pending
committee
cases.
about conversations with the White House
And if I may
regarding James
continue,
Comey's indictment.
What you're about to hear isn't political theater. It's a direct warning about what happens when the rule of law is replaced by fear. In this exchange, Representative Julie Johnson confronts Kristi Noem with a simple but devastating truth: enforcing the law without probable cause and due process isn't security, it's constitutional abuse. This isn't just about immigration.
Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just so the American people understand, this issue of weaponization of justice goes to the core of the integrity of our criminal justice system. And I think we can all agree that no individual, no group should be targeted simply because they are a political opponent or because the President of the United States has some personal animosity toward them. You've just said that President Trump is the most transparent president in history. Tragically and chillingly, you may be right when it comes to criminal justice, because far from ending weaponization of justice, I would submit, Madam Attorney General, that President Trump has embodied it. And we have a record. It is a public record of his express instructions that certain individuals be investigated. The Attorney General of New York, Tish James, my colleague Adam Schiff, the former CISA director, Chris Krebs, the DHS former Chief of Staff, Miles Taylor. There's a list. And he has been transparent. In fact, 5 days before the indictment of James Comey, he put this post up as instructions to you. He didn't mince words. He was very open and public that you should indict James Comey and others because they are guilty as hell. No more delay now. 5 days before you indicted, or grand jury at your instructions indicted James Comey. I'd like to know from you what conversations you've had with President Trump about the indictment of James Comey.
Senator, I am not going to discuss any conversations I have or have not had with the President of the United
Did you
States.
see that
You're
post?
an attorney. You have a law degree, and you know that I'm not going to do that. I also find it fascinating, because I'll keep fighting to ensure that law enforcement and the judicial process move forward without political interference. No one is above the law, not even the President. That's a quote from you, Senator Blumenthal, in 2017.
Well, let me ask you then, when you saw that
No
post,
one is above the law. That was your quote.
When you saw that post, did you talk to anybody in the White House?
I am not going to discuss any conversations I have, nor any investigations,
So
nor
you are unwilling
any
to tell
pending
this committee
cases.
about conversations with the White House
And if I may
regarding James
continue,
Comey's indictment.
and if I may
Let me
continue,
show you a picture.
James Comey was indicted by one of the most liberal grand juries in the United States.
The night before James Comey's indictment, you had dinner with the President of the United States. Pretty intimate group. Was
Actually, there
James
were a lot of
Comey
people there that
discussed-
night. That's a great
Was James
picture.
Comey discussed at that dinner?
I love that picture. That's a great picture. And there were a lot of people there that night. I think the
Well-
entire cabinet was there.
Did you discuss James Comey with the President of the United States? He was sitting just to your left.
Well, 2 seats down, yes, 2 seats down. And I am not going to discuss any
I'm going to take
conversations
that
I've
as
had
a
or not
yes,
have with the
because
President of the
American
United
public
States.
is entitled to know, Madam Attorney General.
The entire cabinet
whether
was at that
you took
dinner, too,
instructions from President Trump after he told you very directly to indict James Comey, which is weaponization of the Department of Justice.
Oh,
You know,
wait.
I want to agree with my colleague, Senator Hawley, that weaponization of our justice system must end. That's the reason that I propose legislation, and I challenge him and my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to join me in legislation that would create a statutory right of action for people who are selectively or maliciously prosecuted for political reasons. It would codify your manual, the Department of Justice manual, on political prohibitions against political considerations in charging decisions, and prohibit the White House from intervening, President Trump and any other president from intervening in charging decisions. It would make reforms to the grand jury process. You've just said this grand jury was liberal. We should reform the grand jury process to ensure that the government is not abusing its power and authority, and it will require transparency and accountability reforms at DOJ so that you will and other attorneys general be held accountable for these kinds of decisions. Will you join me in supporting that kind of reform?
Senator Blumenthal, I find it so interesting that you didn't bring any of this up during President Biden's administration when he was doing everything to protect Hunter Biden, his son. And I think you just saw what Director Radcliffe just released.
You know, this is an effort to be
Information.
positive.
If I can finish
and
answering the
constructive,
question, I'm not
Madam
going to
Attorney
yell
General.
over you. I'm not going to get in the gutter with you. But information that the Biden administration told them not to investigate Hunter Biden's involvement with Ukraine. I'm not going to be lectured to you about integrity
topic,
by
and I'm hoping that
someone
you will review
who
the
lied about
legislative
being in the military just
and
to be
support
elected
them.
a senator.
The merger between Hewlett-Packard Enterprises and Juniper Network was settled. You authorized the settlement. It was the subject of a lawsuit to block it. The settlement produced virtually no concessions from Hewlett-Packard. It was a settlement that prompted criticism from the Antitrust Division. Did you authorize that settlement yourself?
As I stated earlier, Gail Slater is doing an incredible job running the antitrust unit. And as I stated earlier, that is still a pending matter. As
Well,
you
you
should know
then
with a law
fired,
degree,
did you not,
that all
two-
mergers, if I can finish answering the question.
I'm going to,
If I
with
could finish,
apologies,
no, I'm
interrupt
answering
you
the question.
because my time is limited.
No, well then don't ask me a question. So,
Let me just ask you,
as
did
I
you-
said, you have a law degree. You know that not only are mergers agreed upon, but they have to go to a court of law to be approved. It's a multi-step process. And as I said earlier, that is still pending. And I have full faith in Gail Slater.
And Ms. Slater reportedly objected to the settlement.
Reportedly,
And moreover,
moreover.
2 of her top officials were fired, Roger Alford and Bill Sinner. Did you authorize and direct those firings after they objected to the settlement?
I am not going to discuss personnel matters or pending litigation in my office.
Let me ask you about another merger. The merger involving 2 home health care agencies on favorable terms, likely to drive up costs for millions of America. The Transportation Department's rule to provide compensation to travelers impacted by airline-caused flight delays, which was canceled. The merger of Skydance and Paramount, after Paramount's ownership took a number of steps favorable to the president. These kinds of mergers belie the claims that President Trump himself has made, that this administration will stop big corporate mergers that ultimately benefit the owners of those corporations rather than consumers or ordinary, everyday Americans.
Senator,
and let me ask you
wait,
about
you just listed, you just gave a
Well,
list
let me just
of
finish.
many mergers.
I have a
Can
question
you
for
talk
you.
to me about the issue with these mergers?
I do have a question. In the merger that took place,
Which
that was
merger? You've
approved
listed many.
involving American Express GBT, I understand that Brian Ballard, longtime backer and head of the law firm where you worked, was instrumental in lobbying the Justice Department to drop that lawsuit. It was dismissed, so it's not subject to a court review. What conversation did you have with Mr. Ballard?
Senator Blumenthal, I cannot believe that you would accuse me of impropriety when you lied about your military service.
I am
you
not
lied.
asking
You
you-
admitted you
I am
lied
not
to be
accusing you
elected
of
a U.S. senator.
impropriety. I'm
You
asking
lied.
you
How
about
dare you? I'm a
conversations
career
with
prosecutor.
Mr.
Don't you
Ballard,
ever challenge my integrity.
had
I have
apparently-
abided by every ethics standard. Do not question my ability to be fair and impartial as Attorney General and anything
You'll
with
answer that
my
question to
former
another of my
firm,
colleagues.
Ballard Partners.
Thank you.
Senator Lee has asked for the chair.
Yeah, just wanted to note for the record, the Paramount merger that he referenced was not within the Department of Justice's hand, but that was at the FCC, not the Department of Justice. Attorney General Bondi would have had nothing to do with that. Thanks.
And that was why I asked Senator Lee.
Julie Johnson directly confronts DHS Secretary Kristi Noem over what Johnson describes as systemic abuses by immigration enforcement agencies and a fundamental breakdown of the rule of law. Rather than framing the issue as a partisan or ideological disagreement, Johnson grounds her argument in constitutional principles, legal standards, and first-hand observations, arguing that current enforcement practices are actively violating due process and civil rights. Johnson begins by addressing what she sees as an escalating climate of fear across the country. She explains that this fear is not limited to undocumented immigrants, but extends to lawful residents, American citizens, and even law enforcement officers themselves. According to Johnson, this atmosphere is driven by rhetoric coming from the highest levels of government and filtering downward into enforcement behavior. She warns that such fear is dangerous because it erodes trust, destabilizes communities, and increases tension between the public and law enforcement. At the center of Johnson's critique is Secretary Noem's claim that DHS is restoring the rule of law. Johnson flatly rejects this assertion and explains that the rule of law rests on two core pillars: probable cause and due process. She argues that neither is being consistently respected. Johnson states that individuals are being detained or arrested based solely on appearance, particularly skin color, without any individualized suspicion or evidence of wrongdoing. She emphasizes that this practice is incompatible with constitutional standards and cannot be justified under any legitimate interpretation of lawful enforcement. Johnson further explains that due process, the right to a fair hearing and legal protections before being deprived of liberty, is being routinely denied. She describes cases in which individuals are detained for days without hearings, access to legal review, or meaningful opportunities to challenge their detention. According to Johnson, these practices represent a severe departure from constitutional norms and threaten the legal protections that apply to everyone in the country, not just immigrants. To support her claims, Johnson cites her visit to an ICE detention facility outside Dallas. There, she observed that more than 70% of detainees were classified at the lowest threat level and had no criminal history whatsoever. This directly contradicts repeated claims by the administration that enforcement efforts are narrowly focused on serious criminals or national security threats. Johnson argues that these findings expose a gap between official rhetoric and operational reality. The script also highlights the human consequences of these policies. Johnson recounts multiple incidents in which American citizens were detained by ICE despite clearly identifying themselves as U.S. citizens. Some were allegedly assaulted, suffering broken ribs, brain injuries, and other physical harm. In one case, an elderly man was reportedly knocked to the ground after asserting his citizenship, only to be detained anyway. Johnson stresses that such actions represent an alarming disregard for both civil rights and basic human dignity. While Johnson acknowledges that many ICE and Border Patrol agents perform their duties professionally and lawfully, she draws attention to the existence of bad actors who exceed their authority. She argues that leadership has failed to adequately discipline or rein in these individuals. According to Johnson, the lack of accountability sends a dangerous message that misconduct will be tolerated or ignored, further eroding public trust. A recurring theme throughout the script is oversight. Johnson emphasizes that congressional concerns have been raised repeatedly through hearings and Formal letters, many of which have gone unanswered. She frames this lack of response as an institutional failure that allows abuses to persist unchecked. Johnson argues that oversight is not anti-law enforcement, rather, it is essential to maintaining legitimacy, professionalism, and public confidence in policing institutions. The analysis portion of the script underscores why this moment matters beyond immigration policy. It explains that when probable cause and due process are treated as optional, enforcement shifts from lawful action to arbitrary power. Arrests become seizures, and security becomes intimidation. The script warns that constitutional erosion rarely happens all at once. Instead, it occurs gradually through normalized exceptions, unanswered complaints, and unchecked authority. Ultimately, the script presents Johnson's warning as universal.